All right, so pedigrees, this is a way of studying the transmission of traits in humans. And so it's sort of just like a family tree, and it just shows who shows certain traits and who doesn't. And then it's like solving a logic problem. You can look at who has the traits and who doesn't, and sort of trace it back and figure out the pattern of inheritance. So there's 4 patterns of inheritance that we've learned. The first pattern was autosomal dominant. Autosomal just means it's not sex-linked. So an autosomal dominant trait would be represented by, like, for example, big B, or big B, little b. People that showed one of those would have the trait. That's what autosomal dominant means. What would be the code if it was an autosomal recessive trait? Little b. So people with little b would show the trait. The third option that we learned about in this chapter would be sex-linked dominant, where if you have one copy of X big B, you show the trait. Either X big B, X little b, or X big B, Y. And then finally, sex-linked recessive. In sex-linked recessive, if you were a male, you'd be X little b, Y. And for a female, what would you be? Right. X little b, X little b. So the goal in a pedigree is to try to figure out which one of those 4 patterns the trait is showing. Okay? So there are some specific clues to look for that will help you determine what kind of trait it is. And so these are basically the 4, there's actually a lot of clues. You'll see this when we do the activity that we're going to work on today and tomorrow. But what I've done is I've summarized it into just 4 things to look for. If you can remember these 4 things, you will have no trouble trying to figure out the pattern of a particular trait. So the first one is that in a dominant trait, it should never, ever skip a generation. Meaning, if you see in the pedigree that a child is colored in, and it's a dominant trait, one of their parents also had to have it. If you see this, where neither parent is colored in, but then the child shows it,
it's recessive, right?
It would have to be recessive, exactly, because this parent could be big B, little b, and this parent could be little b, and now you could get this child. If the trait was dominant, you'd be crossing little b with little b, there'd be no way for it to show. So that's your first clue. If you see that it skips generations, it's recessive. If it does not, it's automatically dominant. So that should be easy, and we're going to do a few practice ones. Secondly, sex-linked traits. Sex-linked traits can never be passed from father to son, because fathers give their sons what?
Y.
The Y chromosome. So if you see a father has it, a mom doesn't, they have a son that has it, that automatically tells me it cannot be sex-linked. Because if it was sex-linked, he would be X big B Y, and he would give the son the Y. The mom would have to be carrying the gene in order for the son to have it.
So all sex-linked things are on the X, none of them are on
Yes,
the Y?
there are rare ones, but for the purposes of the AP exam, they're never going to give you one that's on the Y. For pedigree and all of that sort of stuff, it's always going to be on the X. The third option is sex-linked dominant. If it's sex-linked dominant, a father would pass it to every single daughter. If you think about it, if he's X big B Y, every daughter's going to get a copy of that X from him. So that means that it's going to be passed from fathers to every single daughter they have. And finally, in a sex-linked recessive trait, you typically are going to see it much more common in males. Like when you look through the pedigree, and I showed you one for hemophilia a while back in the royal family, and we counted, and there were like 5 or 6 boys with hemophilia. There wasn't a single girl. There were girls that were carriers of it, they had a copy of it, but there were no girls that actually showed it. Because sex-linked recessive traits, males only have to get 1 copy. Females, in order to have it, would have to get a copy from their mom and a copy from their dad. So those, if you can remember those 4 clues, you shouldn't have any trouble classifying traits. So let's do a couple of practice ones so that you can see how this works. And then I'm going to let you guys work on some practice ones yourselves. Everybody got this?
So what's the objective that you're trying to find?
I'm going to show you right now. So let's take a look at this and you'll see, oops, let me go back to example 1. All right, so example 1. So here's a family. They tell you that the squares that are not colored in represent a normal male. A colored square represents a whirling male. I'm pretty sure whirling is referring to, you know how people get cowlicks? Like where their hair grows? I think that's what whirling is. And then a circle is a normal female, and a colored in one is a whirling female. And then these represent your generation. So this is sort of like great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, children, and grandchildren, whatever. But this is your generations. These are their children if the line comes straight down to them. But this is not their child. They married this person. So it's pretty straightforward. And they're always going to tell you. You don't even have to memorize that a square is a male because they're going to give you one of these keys. So the first thing we want to figure out is the trait dominant or recessive? Dominant or recessive? So anybody tell me what you think?
What trait?
The trait of whirling.
Dominant.
Dominant. Do we see any case where no parent shows it and a child shows up with it? No. So we can conclude that this is a dominant trait.
Wait,
Yes?
how can you conclude it?
Because it doesn't skip generations.
Okay.
If it was recessive, you would see like no parent has it and then a child appears with it. Second part, is it sex-linked or autosomal?
Autosomal.
Autosomal, what's your clue?
Not all boys and girls have it.
It's very.
First of all, it varies, right? You see women and men with it. But on top of that, check this out. Father gave it to son. Father gave it to son. If you see fathers passing to sons, it can't be sex-linked because fathers would have given their sons the Y. The mom would have had to give it to the son. So this one would be autosomal dominant. So let's try another one in case you're still a little shaky on it. Here's example 2. Is it dominant or recessive? I hear recessive. Where's the clue?
Well, because the generation there is all white.
Right here. Exactly. Well, yeah, that's true, but here's your biggest clue. Neither of these parents show it, and they have a child that has it. That's what I mean by skipping a generation.
So that means it's recessive.
So this trait has to be recessive, because if it was dominant, there would be no way for these two recessive parents that don't have it to suddenly have a child with it. So that tells me it's recessive. And next, autosomal or sex-linked?
What up?
Autosomal.
Autosomal, where's your clue?
I think that generation
Father
there
passed
didn't
it to
have it.
son.
Right here, father passed it to sons. And on top of that, if it's recessive, we should see it in males and not really showing up much in females. And if you notice here, it's pretty common in both. So this would be, autosomal recessive. All right, let's try another one. All right, this is easy. Dominant or recessive? That should be a breeze. Recessive, right? Look, skips a generation here. Neither parent, and they see it here. There's several, neither parent here, and you see it. So it's definitely recessive. Now, sex-linked or autosomal?
Sex-linked.
Sex-linked. For one thing, who has it?
All boys.
All boys. And we don't see any fathers passing it to sons. Now, somebody asked me the other period, they go, well, couldn't you work it out the other way? It might work out the other way. I'm not going to say that you can eliminate it, but they're going to give you something obvious like this. They're wanting you to remember the clues. If it's mostly males that have it, and it skips generations, and males never pass it to other males, they want you to go with sex-linked recessive. They're not going to give you some trick problem where they are expecting you to try to work it through to make sure. Look for the obvious. All right, I think I have 2 more.
So all of these are look for the obvious.
Yeah, and they should be on the test too. All right, so here's another one. Dominant or recessive?
Recessive.
Recessive, how do we know? Where's our clue?
3 and 4 is good.
3 and 4 don't have it, and they have a child with it. 13 and 14 don't have it, and they have a child with it. So this has to be recessive. And now, sex-linked or autosomal?
Autosomal. Father to son.
Father to son. Where do we see father to son? 2 to 6. Thank you. 2 to 6. And notice it's pretty equally spread males and females. So autosomal recessive. Now here's the next thing they could give you. They could even tell you it's autosomal recessive, and then they could ask you a couple of questions. They could say, what's the genotype of person number 6?
Worthing male.
That's phenotype. What's the genotype?
Yeah.
It's autosomal, so there's no X's and Y's.
X little.
No X's.
Wait, what's the question? Little genotype?
The genotype.
Oh.
So right. So he would
Little b,
be
little b.
little b, little b. And person number 11,
Still little b.
still little b. Everybody colored in black in this case. And what about person number 5?
Big B, little b.
How do you know that they're not big B, big B?
They had to
Because
get
they're
a
paired.
Good, because number 2 was little b, little b. So they had to get a little b from them.
So if it was sex linked, then you use the X symbol.
Right, if it was sex linked, and we already established that it wasn't. All right, last comment, and then we're gonna do. I'm gonna show you something else. In some cases, they make it even easier for you. In some cases, they actually show carriers in the karyotype, meaning they show you the people who have a copy of it but don't show it. So, for example, this person they're showing is a carrier. They have a copy of it, but they don't show it. So automatically, I know if there are carriers. What's that telling me? It has to be a recessive trait, right? Because if it was dominant, one copy, you'd have it.
Well, so white is dominant.
So in this case, right. So in this case, we're assuming that this trait, whatever it is, that's colored in black, is recessive. So now that we know that, can you tell me if it's sex-linked or autosomal?
The trait is always the black one?
The trait is the black one.
Okay.
It's sex-linked. Why?
Because the females
All the daughters. Yeah.
Notice that females are carriers, and only males actually end up showing the trait. And remember, if a male is X little b y, every one of his daughters is going to get an X little b from him. And notice that they did. X big B, they got an X little b. X big B, X little b. All right, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of practice of how to do these. It's really just a matter of practice, really. The more you practice them, the better you'll do. If you want, I'll try to put up some Mastering Bio practice pedigrees for you. But once you get the hang of it, it's really not hard.